One of my first exposures to the Digimon franchise, after the virtual pets of course, were the Digimon video games. Shortly after being given my first Digimon virtual pet as a child, I learnt of a Digimon PlayStation game when browsing my local video rental store. This game was called simply Digimon World, which I obviously borrowed immediately and had a great time not being very good at the game because I didn't have the internet at the time and it had too much going on for my little child brain, and I always got my Digimon evolving into Numemon. But hey, I had fun, and I have a lot of nostalgia from this game. And then, of course, a few years later, I was given the next Digimon game that released in Australia, which was called Digimon World 2003, which I definitely enjoyed more than the original, and I got further into it than I did with Digimon World, as it was a completely different game in terms of genre, gameplay, and overall gaming experience. Now, this is something that I've always appreciated about the Digimon games. They don't just stick to the one genre, and for the most part, they don't all follow the same formula, and this is still very true to this day. While the video games may not typically be the first thing that comes to mind for some when thinking about the Digimon franchise, as that would typically be the anime or the virtual pet releases, there have been quite a few video games released in the last few years that I'd honestly recommend. So first of all, I don't necessarily recommend any of the old PlayStation 1 games, as some of them have either not aged particularly well, have better sequels, or both. Or in the case of Digimon World 2003, despite its grindy RPG nature, I'm just simply too far blinded by nostalgia to see it as anything other than a masterpiece. Not to mention that they're harder to get hands on legally because some of these are games from older consoles that you may not have. And then there's also the DS Digimon games, which people seem to really love and recommend, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend these as they can be even more grindier than Digimon World 2003. Digimon World Championship is, as the kids would say, a based goat, and I'm honestly sick of pretending it isn't. But not a lot of people actually talk about Digimon World Championship, but I really do like it. But in terms of more recent releases, I just want to talk about and look at the most recent 3 releases, and the easily accessible games from the Digimon franchise that offer 3 different and unique genres and takes on the franchise. First of all, we have Sleuth and Hacker's Memory, which I'm including as one game as that's how it's now released in the most recent complete edition of the game. It's a fairly fun RPG, however, the lack of skippable text makes any subsequent playthroughs fairly tedious. Otherwise, it's incredibly fun the first time around. However, the levels and areas that aren't in the human world are very blue, as apparently the internet is just the colour blue. The human world locations are pretty cool though, and are actually accurate to their real life counterparts. Going to Japan and exploring Nakano but knowing your way around Nakano because of a video game is kind of a fun experience, and I really do appreciate how essentially accurate they have done Nakano Broadway in the Sleuth game. So that's definitely a must visit if you've played this game and you are planning a trip to Japan, to Tokyo. Definitely check out Nakano Broadway. It is one of my main recommendations, especially if you do like this game. Then, of course, we have another Digimon game called Digimon Surive, which is a point-and-click visual novel with tactical RPG elements with a more adult demographic than previous entries in the franchise. Surive is a beautiful love letter to the franchise and has various story elements that I've always wanted from the Digimon anime. There are 4 different full endings depending on the options that you pick, which also impacts how your Digimon Agumon evolves. However, as much as I really enjoy Surive, and how I would say it's probably my favourite of all the Digimon games, I'm not really sure if I'd want a second one, at least not so soon. I appreciate it for how unique it is in terms of both gameplay and story, and I feel like anything similar wouldn't have the same impact. It's also a harder one to recommend because not everyone likes point-and-click visual novels, and because it is like, I would say 70% visual novel, 30% tactical RPG. In fact, that's what it was advertised as, and I would say that that is fairly spot on. So not everyone might like the amount of text they have to skip through if they do want to play this game. So I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to anyone who doesn't like those types of games. In a similar way, Cyber Sleuth also requires a lot of text, so if you don't like text, these first two recommendations may not be the best for you, because Cyber Sleuth has a lot of text. At least in Survive, it's more or less skippable, especially because there's a setting in your future playthroughs where you can skip scene text, which is a great addition, honestly. And then lastly, we have Digimon World Next Order, which released on the Switch and PC in early 2023, but previously had releases on PS4 as well as the Vita in Japan. Next Order is a sequel to the original Digimon World, and has the same gameplay of being an adventure game, mixed with a virtual pet. It's a lot of fun, but the fact that your Digimon has a life cycle and becomes a weak baby again can be annoying, especially if you're on the end game and you're fighting a super strong, important boss, but then your Digimon dies of old age, and you effectively have to raise them from an egg again. Sure, they do carry over some stats and they are stronger than they were as a baby level previously, but they're still a baby level Digimon, so you effectively have to train them up, evolve them, and then continue on with the story. That is basically my only complaint with the game. I found that Next Order was a great sequel to the original. You don't have to necessarily have played the original, there's just a character, which is the playable character from the first game, who appears in the game as kind of like a side character. He kind of helps out a little bit. So if you haven't played the first game, you don't necessarily need to, but it is a sort of like a sequel, but it's not required to play the original, which is something that I do like about it. It's a great sort of, hey, look, kids, you remember this game from when you were kids? No, then that's okay. You can still enjoy the game. In fact, I believe that this game did a lot better than the original. It improved on a lot of my negatives. It doesn't make it as hard to get certain evolutions because it shows you what evolutions you can get. It makes it a lot easier. Some may say that that is a bad thing because some people do prefer harder games. In fact, the Next Order version that came to Switch and PC this year actually added an even easier mode of difficulty, which I would definitely recommend if you don't want the challenge. But I like the fact that it does have a difficulty level. I'm a big supporter of difficulty levels in games. I feel like I like my games easy, but I understand that not everyone is like that. So you can kind of please everyone if you have super easy, super hard, or just normal. But anyway, I do recommend Next Order. I really had a blast when playing it this year, but again, not for everyone. But I can probably say that about all three of these games. I do love all three of these games, but for different reasons. So would I recommend any of these over each other? Not really. While I do enjoy Survive probably the most and Next Order the least, even though I still really loved it, I honestly feel like, depending on what kind of gamer you are, what kind of games you enjoy, you might enjoy a different sort of thing. If you are really into the story aspect, I would definitely recommend Survive. If you like more of like a gameplay element, definitely Next Order. If you want something in between those two, Cyber Sleuth. And that's basically all my thoughts about it. Again, you can go back and play older games. I'm not saying that the older Digimon games are bad, but they just have issues that have may not aged well, or they have better games that have come out, or they're just harder to get your hands on. These three games all released in the last few years, so they're presumably still available on all online storefronts and in-person stores physically, so you can just pick them up today. A lot easier than if you have to either browse online for emulators and ROMs, or you have to pay basically extortion fees on getting physical releases from ages ago that aren't always guaranteed to work perfectly as discs kind of deteriorate. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Let me know your thoughts, comments, questions in the comments and questions section below. Like this video for my love of Digimon World 2003 forever. Like, that's always the game that I say is the best, but again, nostalgia goggles are permanently glued to my head on this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have subscribed, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell your enemies, And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!